over. Is it snowing in your neighborhood?
Oh, not downtown.
Not downtown?
No.
Oh, we've got a snow squall up toward Lansing.
We
It's-
have one in the northeast section. We were out for our afternoon walk and my coat, which isn't really a coat, it's more of a flannel, got nice and white.
uh,
So we're clearly in a new season. But given that it's November 1st and that we haven't really had, at least by us, that's quite a
Yeah, quite a
mistake.
record. But meanwhile, it's blizzarding on my patio furniture, which hasn't gone away yet.
We covered things up a few weeks ago and then I felt bad about having done it, but I can't say that today. I'm concerned.
We do have foot snow in Cayuga Heights.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think you can see it out the window.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe I'll start slowly. People are certainly welcome to join. Just get some of the introductory stuff involved. Okay. Thank you all for attending. My pleasure to actually do something for Love Living at Home. This is a talk I have given on other occasions. And I think that the answer as to why I give it is that factory farming works. And I hope to present some of the points of view as to why it works. As a food scientist, which is my professional category, I always see our goal is to provide food for the world's growing population. And I probably should add the word appropriate food, which takes into account social, economic, cultural, and often in my work, also religious aspects of food. Okay. It is a controversial topic. My goal is to share some information that for some of you may be new, or at least hopefully some parts take a different way of looking at things. The talk is not attempting to be totally balanced. It is certainly skewed towards the positive aspects of factory farming. I am well aware of some of the negatives. And again, and each of you has to come to your own decision about it. But I hope to at least present some of the areas where one may not have given as much thought. Again, information about animal agriculture is not always correct. And I'll start with a couple of interesting quotes. This one points out that, the Ford was considered quite the inventor because he developed a production line, and Apple gets rewarded when it produces more product with less resources. But when agriculture does the same, we scream factory farming. It kind of that agriculture somehow is in a different class. So one of the other things I like to do as part of the introduction is to look at philosophies and morality, and I, in this case, give you a source. It's a course, it's a book on ethics, which was used as a text for an agricultural ethics course that was offered to agricultural faculty around the country through sponsorship by our government. And it points out a point that I must admit I hadn't been aware of, is the tie to reason. The ideas that should come out on top are the ones that have the best reasons. So morality and ethics are tied together, But again, I recognize and certainly am aware that despite that, most of us have an emotional reaction to things, and that also, as individuals, covers some of how we react to things. It's perfectly fine. But hopefully one can distinguish between one's emotional reactions and one's reason and ethics. The other thing I do, and I've just in fact done the exercise in a class yesterday, is I try to identify where I'm coming from by giving my 5 core values, what drives my thinking, hopefully my ethics and my values, which as somebody in animal agriculture, I look at animal welfare, I look at public health, human health and safety issues, the environment and sustainability, and I am involved in our Center for the Environment at Cornell and still involved in some of that. The area that people don't always think about as much is the different forms of agriculture and how they affect workers. And certainly that's for animal agriculture, more complex analysis of how different systems affect the actual people doing the work, giving us the food. And the other thing that certainly my students often do not give enough credence to is the importance of economics. With infinite money, one can have unbelievably good animal welfare and care of animals, etc. I don't know if any of you have ever had the pleasure of actually meeting any of the Budweiser Clydesdales. They have one of the most pampered lives of any animal that I'm aware of. They are unbelievably well kept. They are moved around in really, really expensive trucks. Basically, Budweiser just throws money at that in a way that is just fine if you're using them the way Budweiser uses them for advertising, but you're not going to feed people that way. And so, again, we need to think about how we integrate those. And the way I tend to get students to look at their values is to say you have 100 points and you have to divide them. Because all of these, if you just ask somebody, are you in favor of it? They're likely to say yes. But if you give them 100 points and they have to divide between these 5, it gets interesting. I had one student yesterday who gave economics a 0, clearly didn't care and wasn't concerned in that sense about others who might be food insecure. Animal welfare and public health sometimes have gone up as high as 60 and 70 points. So obviously the other one of these items is totally important to that person. And nothing, excuse me, and nothing else counts. So we see both. So it's important to understand one's value, and very much clearly I do not consider eating animals immoral. Using these, we can analyze different systems. And again, where we will disagree at times is sometimes we're lucky enough that all 5 basically come out on the same side. But often one of these values will not be on the same side, will be bad for want of a better term. And then if it's something you think is worth only 5 points out of 100, it might not make a difference. If it's something you consider 60 points out of 100, it's going to make a big difference. And that's where, even with the same facts, we may not agree.
That's too loud.
But with the same without the same facts, without good facts, you're gonna even more likely totally disagree. So it's important that we at least pay attention. I'm getting a problem with my so I'm gonna put myself on the video. Okay. So again, we need to think about these things. As I said,
Looks like we lost Joe. I think his connection is not so good. So let's hopefully, if you don't mind waiting, he'll probably get back on. And I apologize, I don't have a phone number for him, but maybe I can email him. Oh, there he is. Hi, Joe. Hey, Joe, can you hear me? This is Leslie. Oh, hi. We lost you.
okay.
Do you want to share your screen again and from where you left off?
Mine is showing me with a shared screen. Okay. Oh, I see. I've got to go to I'm on a new altogether. Sorry about that.
It's the way of technology. It happens sometimes.
Okay.
We're not seeing anything. The screen is being shared, but there's no, there we go. There's this slide. Very good. How problems are handled is what we see.
Okay, is that where I blew off, or was it an earlier slide?
I think it was
that I
five,
blew off?
something about five something. Is where
Okay.
we left, where you left us. Maybe one ahead of this? One or two?
It was a rating system for
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
how the
Yeah.
role of how one rates values,
Oh, yeah.
core values. There you are.
Okay.
Cool.
Anyway, I was talking about how those are important and can be divided and puts people into a more critical thinking, think in terms of points and having to divide it. And I've seen values for these going from 0 to 70. So again, as people, we may disagree what is important, but they help us think about these systems. And again, given people with different values of those 5 core values, they're going to be more positive, less positive about what they're doing. And I don't, are people hearing me?
We can hear you. It's a little, your connection is a little fuzzy, but keep going and we'll see how it goes. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, let me know. And again, how these problems are handled, I would argue that there are problems in animal agriculture and agriculture and in other systems. Nothing is that, but the question is, do you just complain about it and boycott it or say negative things, or do you do something about it? And hopefully we will work on these problems and try to make them better. So what I want to talk about today are the following topics, and I'll go through them one at a time, and try to give you some hopefully new ways of thinking about it. Meeting the needs of the future is population. We're hoping that we will level off at about 1.5 billion. Unfortunately, between wars, famine, drought, etc., we may hit that not because we're doing good family planning, but population is just self-destructing. That people don't always think about is we have less land for agriculture. And not all land can produce food. So when we take agricultural land for food, we are cutting down on the amount of agricultural land as the number of people are increasing. And that means that our yield of agricultural product has to go up per acre of land. And that's one of the critical points in thinking about long range and trying to avoid deforestation of the Amazon and other such issues is how do we produce more with less land and less available farmland? And that's part of the challenge we're facing. Indoors and outdoors. This is a beautiful picture of a beautiful day somewhere in the Midwest, probably, of a feedlot. This would be a feedlot, which is part of what people object to. It happens to be a very efficient system. But again, this is not the middle of winter. Think about the middle of winter.
Hey, we lost Joe again. Betsy, or Marcia, do you think we should reschedule this?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, if he could get back on one more time, let's give him
Okay.
my thinking, and then
Okay.
talk about that. Is this something that he typically has?
Would you
Or
have
is it-
that conversation with him, Betsy?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I was guessing that picture was a big demand on the network system.
If
I
you
know
could,
it took a long time to show up,
mm-hmm,
and that probably triggered the disconnect here.
I agree.
Yeah. Sometimes just people have trouble either with their presentation, as Alan just said, or it might be the weather. Who knows?
It's nice
Well-
to have the pictures, though.
Yeah. Hi,
I
Joe,
would
you're
say
back. Can you hear
it-
us?
Definitely. If we
Excuse me,
could have
Giuseppe, yeah.
pictures with this,
Yeah.
that would be better.
I wonder if we all turned off our videos, if that would help.
I think
What?
oh, Alan, you think so?
Really?
I've been
Well,
on
It
Zoom
might, I
before.
don't know how much of a difference it would make.
I think it's
It
Joe's
kinda depends how
connection
much he's
that is the
downloading of our
issue.
pictures.
Yeah. Can you hear
Joe?
us, Joe?
And I'm on the stronger of my connections, but again, I've turned off mine and it might help yours because it's taking in. So if you can and then turn your video off, I guess I should then go back up one slope.
Okay, Joe, this is Betsy. Shall we give it one more try and everybody turn their video off? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah,
I
Okay,
think skipping past this picture would be a good idea. It took a very long time for it to show up when you first talked about it, and it's probably demanding a lot of network bandwidth to show.
oh, okay. But problems do have a bunch of pictures because I'm trying
don't
to,
know.
but I'll
I don't
go
know if they
past
all
them.
would be demanding, but that particular one was notable in the delay
Okay,
at our
Yeah.
end.
but Joe, your voice is
Good.
coming in and out staticky as well. So is everybody else experiencing that? Okay,
Yeah, it's more of
Yes.
a lag than a static, it's like
Yeah.
the.
Right.
but
slow
in other
getting
words,
up
it's not
the internet.
not clear. So
Right.
But it is
Joe, let's
completely understandable.
Yeah, so let's everybody, if everybody turns off their video, right? And then we can give this one more try, but
Turn off our video.
and probably turn off, put yourself on mute
Block
unless
shared
you actually.
screen with video.
Yeah,
It's on the lower left.
Are you seeing my screen?
Lower left, apps, reactions.
Right
What
next
am I
to the
looking
mute
for on the low? Oh, there we are. Sorry, there I
Okay.
see.
And if you're on an iPad, at least my iPad, it's on the right corner, upper corner, and there's the mute button, and then there's the stop and start video. So if everybody goes mute and stops video, and then we'll try it one more time, okay?
Sorry about all that. I was looking forward to giving this. I was not expecting all this challenges. Anyway, talking about indoor agriculture, one of the things, besides being kinder in many ways to the animals, is you don't need to use farmland. In theory, you can even use a Superfund site as long as you concrete it over at the bottom. So again, part of indoor agriculture is you can use land that you wouldn't otherwise use. And we're now seeing more and more efforts at multi-story buildings. In China, I've been told they have a 13-story high pig farm. Good use of land. And what we're seeing, which is even more surprising, though the economics are causing real problems, is plant agriculture moving indoors also. We're getting more and more of our herbs and winter lettuce coming from indoor agricultural operations. So again, outdoors may seem to people more natural, but it's a lot more harsh. And one of the beauties of indoor agriculture from a farming point of view is we control more of the environmental factors for the benefit of the animals, the owner, the workers, but it requires more stewardship. If you're indoors, you're responsible for your animals in more ways than outdoors. But in fact, it's very clear that many of the animals actually are more productive indoors because they also learn that they don't have to worry about predators. They can be more relaxed, so stress is decreased, and that the conditions are what they like. I mean, even though we're indoors, we don't necessarily want to keep our house at 40 degrees in the wintertime and at 90 degrees in the summertime. We could be indoors without controlling the temperature, and that would still be uncomfortable. So again, we need to recognize that indoors, which is very unnatural, in fact, gives better conditions for the animals. And we do the same with our pets, which it's okay, but when we do it with production animals, people give us a hard time. Another aspect is eco-services. Animal agriculture uses many of the byproducts of plant and animal agriculture. So when you have rice or flour, there's a lot of the plant you're not eating. When you have corn, you're eating at most the corn on the cob. All of that rest of that plant material can be used particularly by ruminants, and will to some extent focus on ruminants, meaning mainly cattle, though sheep and goats and llamas and camels are also ruminants. And they also provide manure. What is fascinating to me is that some of the organic folks are particularly anti-animal agriculture, and the only fertilizer that in theory you can use is things like manure because they're opposed to artificial fertilizers. So again, manure is one of the great underutilized resources. And in fact, it is a problem. It is a problem because we're not addressing it. And what's interesting, again, is that the larger farms are much further along in addressing it because some of the things you want to do are very expensive if you've only got a few cattle. So a typical small farm with 100 to 200 investors, some of the other things, but a farm with 5,000 cows can very much justify it and afford it by amortizing it over many more animals. One of the things that indoor agriculture I've already alluded to is that it lowers the stress. And I want to say a few words about stress because it also affects humans. But what we see both in humans and animals is we do better when we're not stressed. Now, the fact is we're actually not trying to get to not stressed, to absolutely no stress. We're really looking at stress optimization. And this quote, I think, hopefully, low stress does not equal good animal welfare. Complete freedom from stress occurs with death. And it's, again, how we cope with stress that's important. So the point being, and I wanted to get to this curve, I hope it doesn't blow us off, is performance versus stress. We normally think of stress in the failure to cope mode, which is too much stress. But one of the complaints we have, and that's sometimes legitimate, is that animals in indoor housing in some of our systems actually show what we call stereotypies. They bite on the bars, they kick the place. And what that generally means is they're bored. The stress is too low. And that's why we've gone into entertainment of animals, things for them to do during the day so they're not bored, so that they get closer to the optimal coping capacity, which, again, the important point here is it's not zero. And in animal agriculture, we do have to look at the board as a concern just as much as excess stress. People, particularly with poultry, are real keen on animals being housed outdoors. It turns out that animals get many more bone fractures with all of the alternatives to cages. Being outdoors doesn't work well. Being in open type housing doesn't work. The cages actually give the least stress in the coping, and the animals are in cages are actually most productive. Want to cover, and because we lost some time, I'm going to do this even faster than I planned, a concept of maintenance energy. This is the most technical item I want to cover, but it's probably one of the most important to get yourself wrapped around. Animals, including us, use a certain amount of food every day to stay alive. Think about what you've eaten today, yesterday, and the day before. Most of us are trying to maintain our weight. Some of us may be trying to lose weight. I think at our age, very few of us are trying to gain weight intentionally. So think about what you eat in the course of a year. All of that is maintenance and is not productive. With farm animals, we're trying to be productive, and we add extra food to be productive. And that extra energy to be productive means either something like milk or eggs, or just gaining weight, growing faster. And that's what we want to look at, what that means. So we've gotten our animals are more productive. What that means is we can produce more milk with fewer cows, dramatically fewer cows. And that, in fact, is affecting our hamburger supply because we have fewer cows that go into hamburger. And that's an issue that McDonald's is very aware of. So the footprint of the average cow has gone way up. The average cow is eating a lot more food than she was in 1944. And these are obviously not the most, but this is the important point. The carbon footprint of a modern cow for a gallon of milk has been reduced by 2/3. So it's the productivity, which is measured in gallons of milk, pounds of weight gain, number of eggs, and the carbon footprint has gone down dramatically. And this is true in most of the Western countries. It's not true in many of the developing countries, because in the developing countries, animals are kept almost as a bank to have a resource. They are not maximized for productivity, and so they're eating constantly because they're not going to slaughter when they cease to be productive. And so the point being is, if you look at maintenance energy, which is the lower part of these graphs, it is amortized in a low production animal over 1 gallon of milk at 16.1 units, or 50 pounds of milk, excuse me, of feed, and it's an energy measure of feed. But for the animal that's twice as productive, that 10 pounds is amortized over 100 pounds. So it's half as much maintenance energy. And that is a remarkable benefit of very high productive agriculture, where we're really pushing these animals. So the question that presents is why I'm so opposed to organic farming. One of the issues is production without the use of modern technology, simply more efficient. And as has been pointed out by one of the African officials of the UN, organic farming is practiced by 800 million people in a world that handles pesticides and fertilizers, and it's not working. People are starving. They need these materials. BST, I know some are probably opposed to it. It cuts down, in this case, is the land requirements. You can do it in many different things. Adding BST makes cows even more efficient. Organic, on the other hand, makes cows less efficient. Increases the inefficiency, the land use in this case, by 30%. So again, what are these trade-offs? Organic is wonderful for people of means. It's not going to help feed the world. And I hear the point I make simply that we normally, if we have BST animals, and if the BST is increasing in the animal, and I say increasing because there is natural BST, bovine somatotrophin hormone, in animals. We do increase it when people are on the birth control. And when we feed the animals BST, but when we take the birth control, instead of getting an extra 5 nanograms, we're getting 35,000 nanograms of estrogen, which is the same kind of compound. 35,000 versus 5. Think about that. Again, there's nothing wrong with BST properly used with the animals. Another issue, grasses and grains. Grass is one of the best solar collectors. If you've read Richard, Michael Pollan, excuse me, book on he talked about Joel Salatin. And Joel Salatin is a solar farmer. I've had farmers raising animals who say we are solar farmers. They're using grass efficiently. And ruminants are the only practical way to transform lots and lots of grass into food rather efficiently when you think of it. Grass, ruminants, people. This is not the little fish eating the bigger fish eating the little fish, the bigger fish being eaten by the very big fish, and so forth, which is much more inefficient. And again, when we talked about farmland, a third of farmland is grassland. Think about when you drive out of Ithaca, particularly going towards New York, which is going into the rolling hills. That land is great for pasture, for farm animals, because you keep the grass on it, which prevents erosion. You turned it into cropland, it would be a disaster. So about a third of our agricultural land is grassland. And therefore, again, we need to use it. And again, the animal rights people, who I normally disagree with, but they do have a point, they consider all animals equal. If you use that criteria, cropland actually kills more animals than animal agricultural land, because you're killing lots and lots of small animals and birds, and it is really much more destructive of animal life than pasture land. An interesting concept, I leave it with you. Grass-fed beef, another topic. I talked about it earlier, the grain that is byproducts. Most of what we feed animals is byproducts. And raise corn just for animal feed, and one can argue, is that a good thing? And I'm willing to entertain that it can be a decision both ways. But many of these products are fed to help. And that's a question each of us needs to answer. But again, I asked the interesting question. We also waste a lot of food. We have a fair bit of food waste, some of which will never go away. Nobody's going to eat watermelons completely. You're always going to have a rind. Should some of that to go to animals like pigs with proper heat treatment to deal with trichinosis? And think about all the food that does go to dogs and pets and cats, dogs and cats. Should we be feeding pigs and cattle? Think about how much food or food byproducts we use for pets, which unfortunately in this country, and that one you'll probably nail me for, which unfortunately we don't eat. And we spend lots of money taking care of them. And in fact, these are pack animals, both of these. And cats are very much an outdoor prowling animal. Dogs are pack animals, both of which we often lock in our houses all day. Is this good or bad? Again, I want to raise an interesting issue on distillers' dried grain. We hear a lot about ethanol production for fuel, and people talk about food versus fuel. The fact is that corn has a lot of starch. We know about corn starch. And corn and starch is the raw material for ethanol production. So when you take corn and ethanol, a product of that, which is called distillers' dried grains, is actually a better feed. It can replace more corn or soy meal by weight than more by weight. In other words, 1.22 tons of 1 ton of distiller's grain replaces 1.22 tons of corn or soy meal. So there are some real benefits even of taking corn and making fuel and then feeding it. But here's where the really big change is. Speeding up of the growth cuts the number of days of maintenance. We talked about how maintenance is always there. So if you have fewer days on maintenance, faster growing, pushing the animals, you actually get less manure, less of the things that we're worried about as negatives. But here, think about this. How do we do that when animals are out on pasture? The research indicates that even on pasture, if we gave them a supplement, they would grow even faster, which we now understand in terms of maintenance. But the other thing that happens is it actually cuts the methane produced per day. So fewer days of feeding is less methane because but each day it actually produces less methane because in fact it is the grass digestion that gives us the highest methane. And so in fact, one of the other things people are doing even more so is looking at supplements that specifically lower methane production. So again, modern high production agriculture is actually contributing less to environmental concerns than ordinary agriculture. And here I give some math. I'm going to skip that for now, but do want to make some distinctions. One of the things we are seeing is the integration of solar panels with animal agriculture and plant agriculture. Sheep and goats are perfectly happy going in and out of pasture land that is, the collectors are high enough that they can get underneath and cut down the grass. We're also seeing solar collectors in areas with water drought issues that are being designed to collect moisture from the air, using the energy from the solar collectors to actually produce water that helps things grow underneath, and again can be harvested by sheep and goats without using a lot of electrical motors and things that can't get in and out of the solar collectors. We're seeing goats going into forests to prevent forest fires, to clear out the underbrush. So my new motto is only goats can prevent forest fires. And by the way, if you have any problems with poison ivy, you might want to rent a goat. They love to eat poison ivy and it is perfectly harmless for them. And here's a very advanced system where they're growing fairly complex crops. Those are soil collectors above. They are spaced out more than we're used to seeing because in fact the goal is to allow enough sunlight through, but to do some shading at the same time. And that's the top view. I went through it quickly because it clearly gave us bandwidth. One of the other areas is the issue of genetics and behavior. I want to talk about, quote, normal behavior, which is kind of strongly talked about. Some of that normal behavior is very negative. And basically, many animals, if they're in their optimum stress level, their best working conditions, they don't need those behaviors. If they're offered and can be offered, it's nice to do, but it may not be necessary. The other thing here is that some of these are being bred out. We have bred animals for production. And sometimes that's a problem because we don't pay enough attention to the holistic animal. And sometimes it's getting rid of behaviors that are counterproductive. I also would argue this word, the government has been paying attention to this word natural. I have suggested in writing to our government that the only things that are natural are wild fish and wild game. Anything coming off of a farm is not natural. It's domesticated, which is wonderful. I'm all in favor of it, but I wouldn't call it natural. And so some of our agricultural problems are because of classical breeding, which we have abused both with farm animals and with companion animals. One of the most dramatic in a number of animals is leg weakness. One of the things we're doing is now addressing that by, again, using classical breeding. We don't need to do anything unusual, though having modern computer programs certainly makes complex breeding choices easier to do. So it, in fact, allows us to get these things happen sooner. Next topic, human health. Animals provide essential nutrients. Is it possible to be a vegetarian? Yeah, definitely. Is it possible to be a vegan? Yes, if you pay a lot of attention. Being a vegan means you have to understand modern nutrition. You can't just pick and choose vegan foods and not pay attention to what they are and their nutrients are. Do I believe in what, I don't know how many of you were aware at one point, we had Billy Bob's, what now where Chow is on Trip Hammer Road, and they used to reward people who ate a 40-ounce roast beef. My younger son did it twice and had his name up on the board twice. This is not a healthy thing on a regular basis. Doing it every once in a while won't hurt you. We need a small amount of meat, I would argue. We do not need the amount of meat most Americans eat. And as we get older, we probably need to pay attention to that even more, because we do need protein as we get older, and we don't always get enough. There are things that there is omega-3 fatty acids in meats. The big things are iron, B12, and zinc, which are much more available into our body than particularly with the iron. So again, we still have the problem that our students, where I have some data, I was talking to a faculty member at University of Minnesota, and he does iron status in women of reproductive age, students mainly, and half of the women generally are considered to have a lack of a full iron status. They're not anemic, but they're borderline anemic, and their iron status, because many of them are not eating a little bit of red meat every day. And that goes to the question of all these vegetable-based products. They're high in salt. I'm now at the situation, because of a previous heart attack, where I have to watch salt content. And again, the nutritional balance of these materials is very, very different. They are not yet a substitute for meat. They may look like meat. They may try to taste like meat. I would argue they don't taste like meat, and they don't bite and eat, in other words, texture like meat. And they are not as nutritious. They have a different nutrition. And if you're not eating meat, you may be missing some of what you need to do. And interestingly enough, I would argue that they are almost all ultra-processed. Now, personally, I don't have a problem. I work in the food industry as a food scientist. and believe that good ultra-processed foods have a place. I also believe that genetic modification has a place. Interestingly enough, the Impossible Burgers have been widely accepted, even though one of their key ingredients, the false blood, is a genetically modified material. A big complaint, another topic, big complaint, is that antibiotics are overused. Yes, they have been, and yes, we're dealing with it. And here's a case where we've taken a problem and we've dealt significantly with it. We no longer permit over-the-counter purchasing of agricultural drugs that are of human use. They must be prescribed by a veterinarian. And with that, we've seen a dramatic drop in the use of antibiotics in the antibiotics of human importance. There are some that are not considered relevant for humans, and there are some that actually do not cause the development of antibiotic resistance in microbes. And those are still being used. One of the things I've become aware of is that our pet owners often give antibiotics to their animals, and that's a big pain in the neck. And so people give up once the animal looks like it's feeling well. It is important for humans, for pets, for farm animals. If you're on an antibiotic treatment, do the whole treatment. When you cut it short, that helps speed up antibiotic resistance. So part of it, of the problem, is human behavior and not what we're doing with farm animals. And we'd like to say a few words about animal welfare. As Jeremy Bentham, one of the original utilitarians, one of the first animal welfareists, pointed out that death by slaughter, even if poorly done, is likely to be better than death in the wild. And Dr. Temple Grandin, who some of you may know, the autistic woman who works in this field, will also point out nature is cruel. One of the benefits we have is, as humans, we can be better than the cruelty of nature. And I spend a lot of time working on that, but that is a separate talk for maybe sometime in the future. Oh, and here's directly her quote. And with that, I will open it up for questions with my two final quotes here. Believe nothing that you think. And the Mencken quote, which I added an extra word, but I'll read it without. For every problem, there is a solution, which is simple, clean, and wrong. I'm willing to admit that maybe only sometimes wrong. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, you want to stop sharing your screen? That might make it possible for people to
Yeah, I've got it.
use a little less bandwidth.
There we go.
And feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment.
Well, it was very interesting. A lot to think about.
That's what I'm hoping, just giving you some of my thoughts. And if anybody wants the PowerPoint, well, I guess it's been recorded, so it'd be available. But if anybody wants the PowerPoint set, I'm happy to mail it and share it. Just drop me an email at jmr9@cornell.edu.
Great, Joe. I will email you and we'll include it with our we post these recordings on our YouTube channel. We'll include access to the.
So Joe, I have a question. You've had a long career, most of it at Cornell, a lot of it. Have you seen differences in the students? And can you tell us what the trends might be?
Well, I think in this area, we are seeing, though not consistently, both animal welfare and environment taking stronger views. I think people are getting the environmental message, which I think is extremely important, and are beginning to, I think, understand that animal rights and animal welfare are two different things. That hopefully all of us are animal welfareists. If we're going to use animals, we ought to use them in the best possible way and consider their needs as much as we can. Again, within reason. I am strongly anti-animal rights. I am strongly for animal welfare, and I think our students are beginning to get the message. But again, most of the students I come to are exposed to that message. So it's hard to tell if that message is getting through to all the students, or is that mostly what I deal with are students in agriculture. Though when I was teaching kosher halal, I did get students from around the campus, and they kind of were the same. I never broke them down trying to see any differences between them.
And the reason I ask is because it seems like Thanksgiving dinner becomes more fraught each year.
You are certainly seeing an increase in vegetarian and veganism, but not as dramatically as people would like to indicate. And what's been interesting is all these attempts at alt meat, all these products are got a kind of an initial curiosity factor, but that industry is struggling to find its niche. Now, again, part of the problem is I think they oversold these products. We use them, we keep a kosher home, so they offer some real benefits in terms of meal planning for us, but they don't really always work in delivering what they're promising. Some of the older veggie patties in some ways were more honest. They just were veggie patties, and they were bean and corn and spicy and chipotle and all of that stuff. And they were either good or bad. But when you get to things like better Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers, they want you to think that you're having a hamburger. And they don't look like a hamburger. They don't taste like a hamburger. They don't chew like a hamburger. And so they're not delivering on their promises.
Joe? Hi, Joe. This is Roger Segelkin. I used to write about
Recognize the name.
including the animal rights issues. And I wanted to ask you about some of the statistics that critics of the animal industry would raise. But first, I wanted to share my view of animal rights. And I tell my dogs, especially when they're being a little noisy, animals have rights. They have the right to remain silent. And of course they don't. So a couple of the critics of the animal industry, and I'm thinking of people like Colin Campbell and David Pimentel, would come up with elaborate calculations that would show that animal production is uses a lot more water in particular, and probably land and all kinds of resources, including energy resources. And I was never a math major, so I just reported those conclusions without trying to do an analysis of some kind. What is your answer to people who say that animal agriculture uses a disproportionate amount of water and other resources?
It certainly changes the resource balance. I actually did my undergraduate, one of my major research projects as an undergraduate with David Pimentel, and I have been friends with Colin over the years. I know that his professional peers do not agree with his numbers. Animal agriculture probably does use more water, and it's a resource we need to think about. and we need to recycle it better. But there are also places, again, where do you set up? In some parts of the country, animal agriculture probably needs to be cut back. There are other places where there is plenty of water. We happen to live, by the way, in the Great Lakes Basin. We have Lake Cayuga, where we're got 700 feet deep of water. We have water. Again, it's a question of optimizing the use. I think we need to think more in terms of total use of water, but definitely the animals use more water. But we also, in places, when I travel sometimes in the Midwest, a lot of that is all irrigation agriculture. And so what crop are you doing? And the range of water usage for some of the crops will vary over a great amount also. And again, when you talk about high speed, the question of how much water per pound of beef per gallon of milk in a high production agriculture, I would argue is probably, though I haven't done the calculations, is probably going to be less. And again, do you want almonds or do you only want to live on flour? Again, you know, you can pick and choose which crops and which animals you want to do to get the best numbers for your arguments. I remain to be convinced, though I'm not going to say that animal agriculture uses less water. It probably doesn't. Did I see your hand up, Betsy?
Oh, no, that was,
Okay.
I'm not gonna dispute anybody that has calculations to back them up.
Calculations, I would. That's exactly the point, because you can very carefully select how do you figure the water usage for animal agriculture? How do you figure the water usage for crops? You can look at cows versus corn, human corn, or cows versus wheat. But again, how then do you offset the fact that the wheat also is used for straw and bedding and things? And how do you characterize that? Yes, we've got the meat, but think about the fact that, as I remind people, the famous quote from the pork industry, we use everything but the oink. And how do you look at then giving credit for all of those and think about the water usage per unit of production? So again, those are very difficult calculations to make across even the United States, and globally even more difficult. And in fact, that's why you get this major disagreement between the US Department of Agriculture and the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Because when you look at the global picture for animal agriculture, it's significantly worse than American agriculture, which is dragged down by some of the very inefficient small farmers, the organic farmers, and all these other heroes from those in the factory farm. If you took just factory farming and compared it to almond farming, for example, which is a particularly high water usage plant, what does it look like when you also factor in the value of all those byproducts?
Hey, Joe, it looks like Alan Beck has a question. Alan?
Go for it.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that maybe 1/3 of agricultural land was grassland. And you pointed out that, animal use was very efficient on that. There were a lot of good byproducts, and that converting it to cropland would often be damaging ecologically. So we can understand all those as good points. I was wondering if you were talking about something other than animal use of those lands, that 1/3 of agricultural land, and you were trying to avoid, for instance, the negative aspects of what you described as, croplands often being damaging. would there be much selection, many possibilities that would be good, just as alternatives? Again, just if you didn't use them for animal.
I'm not aware of a good use. Again, I wouldn't even on much of that land, some of that land, I don't know how much it is. I wouldn't even want to build housing. I mean, the problem right now is that we're taking good farmland, croplands are more likely to be a housing development because they're flat and easy to build on. If you look at the rolling hills as you go, particularly if you're going to Boston, as you go on Route 206 from Whitney Point to Bainbridge, as you go up and down those hills, I don't know what I would want to do. The one thing I would do is put in trees because you may get more eco service from allowing it to go back to forest as opposed to grassland. To get the eco services, you might be able to raise apple trees on that kind of land. But again, harvesting it becomes more difficult when it's on the hillsides. So I don't see, we had a professor in our department some years ago who worked on the concept of harvesting the grass and taking it to a factory and producing protein, where the big problem is getting rid of the green because people don't want to eat green protein. And then you have a factory and you have factory waste, which is one of the things I worry about with all of these cell cultured meats. They have some very nice properties, but again, you're now building factories. Again, you can build factories on bad land. But I'm not sure that's a really going to turn out to be such a improvement on sustainability. You also need all the feedstocks, which is why they're having such a problem and are not taking off, because they have very expensive, which usually means they're difficult and have negative issues to get all those feedstocks. So I don't have, I don't want to pick on Ed, but since he's also a broad category of agriculture, I don't know if he has any ideas what to do with grassland other than harvest. And it always bothers me when we run every time I hear a lawnmower, it upsets me because all of that, someday I want Joe's Rent-A-Sheep. I want to have my front lawn and back lawn cut by a sheep, as opposed to a gas guzzling, and those 2-cylinder engines are pretty inefficient type of machine. That's why instead of going in and clearing out forests with fancy equipment, we can be feeding animals. Persephone?
Persephone.
Persephone, sorry.
This is a tangent, but you mentioned the goats. The sheep brought to my mind the goats, and I forget what you said about the goats. So remind me of that. Also, you said, it was basically like, if we had nothing else, we want the goats. And you said they consume poison ivy safely. So I'm just wondering, if I then ate that goat, would I be safe from the poison ivy? I'm kind of thinking yes, but I want you to confirm that.
Okay, absolutely, you would be safe.
Good.
Getting processed. In terms of goats, the point being is they eat much rougher. Sheep kind of want at least something that is akin to grass.
Right.
But the goats will go into a forest and eat an awful lot of stuff in the forest
Right.
that cuts down the fire danger.
The forest, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, famously
given
they
all
eat the tin cans, right?
Pardon?
They used to say the goat would eat a tin can. I don't, have you ever heard that?
Yeah,
Pretty
I've heard
close
that.
to that.
I can't believe that, but anyway, yeah, they're very.
I have been working on some projects with a sheep and goat farmer out in
Yeah.
Wisconsin. And so he considers me 2/3 of a sheep goat farmer. I've been stepped on by sheep and goats. I've been kicked by sheep and goats, but I have not been peed on by them.
Well, that's good. And they haven't stolen your lunch that was in a can
So far,
so far. Okay, thank
they
you.
do have problems with what's called metal disease, which is animals taking in metal and damaging their GI system, and goats are particularly fond of that. So yes, they will,
Okay,
but they really like to just eat.
right.
So,
And
so Joe, if you had a flower garden that wasn't fenced and you brought goats in to eat your grass, wouldn't they eat your garden?
Yes,
Probably.
they would.
The problem here is what we
Yeah.
do know is we actually tried to design a system like you have with dogs where you have the electrical collar, which would be actually remotely operated to keep the goats or sheep where you want them. And we definitely believe we could do that. The problem we have is feral dogs. In putting these animals in places without a shepherd, we can get them where we want them and keep them out of your garden, but we can't keep the feral dogs and even domestic dogs from going after them. So Ed, you have a question?
Joe, Ed DeBovi has a question.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that gets overrun by emotion is the economics. We have a wonderful farmers market in Ithaca, but the reality is there's a huge percentage of the population of this area that cannot afford to buy the food there. And that has to do somewhat with the over control by the organic world out there, that what you have to go through to actually produce a product like that. And secondly, we've had this great emotional output over the GMO issues, where it's taken 12, 15 years to get salmon on the market, where they've gone in and just duplicated a gene. And so it gains weight twice as fast as a normal salmon. It's the normal gene that the salmon has. It's like the BST that went wild. It's the normal genes which exist in the cow, and yet the industry went berserker, the people over the issue of BST. So we have an economic issue. We cannot grow, we cannot feed the world under those systems as efficiently as you can with, let's say, the poultry industry is going wild because you can't make protein as efficiently in any other system other than the way the poultry industry does it. And it's been through genetics. They're now, most every one of them has eliminated antibiotics in it. People have gone a little haywire over free range chickens. One of the great disasters now of free range chickens is the high path avian influenza virus, which comes in through the ducks and geese and everything else that fly by and kill all your free range chickens. And so in Europe, they've had to put in rules that all the chickens now have to go back indoors because you don't want high path avian influenza virus circulating in your chickens, because eventually it's going to circulate in your people and kill them as efficiently as it does the chickens. So there are all these economics out there, and it's impossible. Maybe AI will help calculate all these economics, but we have a huge world population that's underfed, and we got to come up with ways of making food available to them at a cost they can afford. We have obesity in this country in horrible numbers simply because the type of food they're eating is horrible. And if we make some of these proteins unavailable, it's just going to get worse.
Totally agree with you. As I say, for me, the Impossible Burger, which is whatever it is, the big thing and positive about it is the fact that it's using a GMO and nobody's arguing about it anymore. I mean, we are unbelievably, I would use the word indulgent. We are so fortunate that we are all, comparatively on the global scale, we're all rich, even if we don't always think of ourselves. And we have access through things like the farmers markets to products that are very inefficiently prepared, but we can indulge in it. And much of what peak consumers want is indulgent because what they don't realize is that farmers have developed all these systems for what is the second slide of mine. It works. They found that they could do a better job of raising their animals. The animals responded better when they did some of these things with the animals. Now, again, they can be overdone. And one of the things we fought in some of the work we did in animal welfare with the supermarket national organization was that when you put birds in a cage, typical cage, you put 5 birds in, all of the birds produce over 300 eggs per year, which you cannot get under most other systems. However, the farmers then got real smart and put in 6 birds. So instead of getting 1,500 eggs, they should have gotten 1,800 eggs. Well, they only got 1,700 eggs, but the economics made sense. And one of the things through that process, working with the industry, we kind of got them to back off from that. That if the extra bird in a cage is showing undue stress, i.e. less eggs, that is wrong. And that's part of optimizing these systems, including animal welfare, as part of the concern. But there's no question in my mind that the appearance of some of these systems has led to us becoming more inefficient. Proposition 12 in California, Prop 3 in Massachusetts are, in my mind, steps backwards in terms of animal welfare, human health, because more of the animals interact with each other, the more disease issues, as Ed certainly knows even better than I do. I don't consider them as sustainable. They're much more inefficient, which is part of sustainability. They're often more difficult for the workforce, though indoor housing can present problems for workers. And again, the economics. Most of the world has food security issues. The more expensive we make food, the more people will be food insecure.
Joe,
Yeah.
thank you for saying kind words about goats. And I have one more attribute, goats, to add to that. I'm thinking of my sister who has a goat farm in the Catskill Mountains. She also does landscape installations in a place where they have terrible invasive weeds and plants and shrubs. So if you have a property that you want to at least see the surface, again, after all the stuff that's growing on it, she'll put up a fence. You have to do this a year or so ahead of time, but she'll put up a good goat fence and lend you some goats. And when they chomp everything down to the ground, then you can see what you have to work with. And in some cases, you still have to go in with machinery to root out some of the roots of these cranky things. She also has a primitive campground where people pay glamping prices to get a place to put their tent, a picnic table, a composting outhouse, and a bear box to keep the bears from eating their stuff. And the most photographed part of her operation is the goats. Nobody doesn't love a baby goat, and they'll play with you. They'll stand on your back if you want to do goat yoga, but I don't recommend that. The people don't realize that those baby goats are about to go off to auction to go to the live markets in New York, wherever baby goats go in the spring. But in the meantime, those the young ones anyway are making a lot of people very happy.
Goats and sheep, I agree, are kind of cute animals, particularly the babies. Even the somewhat older goats, I've come to really like, I like the ruminants in general. I also like cattle. But that is exactly the point. There's a lot you can do with the animals, and that's why the solar thing is so neat. And that I haven't been able to download it quite yet, but I have a wonderful picture of the solar panels with the sheep there. Cornell has been certainly active in that, and the goats in the forest. I mean, think about it. What resources we waste. One of my other favorites that we don't think about enough is every time I watch the acorns come down, I think of our, we all are busy with, and I'm totally supportive of our statements of what we did in terms of taking over native land. Well, the fact is that one of the things that the Native Americans did was use acorns. And just think about how much acorns we have. And again, the question of composting our leaves and all of that to improve soil fertility. I mean, we are not using our resources in our urban and suburban areas anywhere near what we could do and cut down on things like lawnmowers and our very expensive gardeners and all of those things. There's, we could do a lot more with resources. And I certainly got to thank everybody for sticking with this long. And I apologize for the technical issues early on, but I guess I should let people go. And this has been a lot of fun and good questions and good comments. And again, I'm jmr9@cornell.edu if you want the slides specifically, or if you want to ask questions or make a comment. I'm happy, as part of Love Living at Home, I'm happy to be involved with people in these kinds of issues.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate the time and great conversations. Really great.
Great. Look forward to seeing folks at some other event. Take
Indeed.
care.
Goodbye, everybody.